An ordained minister has decided to give up God for a year.
How the heck do you just up and become atheist after being a pastor?
What I'm most worried about right now is figuring out how I can live openly and honestly.
I am finally free to be me.
I have no idea how to find friends or become a part of a community that's not religious.
What does life look like after church, after religion, after God?
That's it in a nutshell.
This is the Life After God podcast, a conversation on the space between belief and unbelief and beyond, with your host, Ryan Bell.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Life After God podcast, where we explore the space between belief and unbelief and beyond. Today is January 27th, and this is episode 22. I'm so glad you're with us today because I have a really fantastic interview to share with you. Today I bring you a conversation with former Mormon and founder and host of Mormon Stories podcast, John Dehlin. John and I have been talking over the last several months online and on the phone about our similar stories and the work that he and I are both doing, and have just found a lot in common between us. And it's, I think, and I hope, the beginning of a great friendship. But today I bring you a conversation with him about his own journey and where he is today and what he hopes for the future of post-theism and the work that he's doing with people that are in the process of doubting and questioning their belief, going through a faith crisis, and the work that he does around that. So I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. John received a Ph.D. in clinical and counseling psychology from Utah State University in 2015. His research interests involve the nexus of religion and mental health. John's research has been published in numerous peer-reviewed scientific journals, including the Journal of Counseling Psychology, the Journal of Sex and Marital Therapy, Identity, the Journal of Cognitive Psychotherapy, the Journal of Homosexuality, and the Journal for the Scientific Study of Religion. Prior to obtaining his Ph.D., John worked for 7 years at the Microsoft Corporation and 3 years at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology as the director of the International Open Courseware Consortium. John's work has been featured in the New York Times, National Public Radio, ABC's Good Morning America, ABC's Nightline, The Wall Street Journal, The Huffington Post, VH1, and Radio West. John also gave a TED Talk in 2013, and I'll provide the link to that TED Talk in the show notes. John's interests, as I said, involve deconversion and people's experience of leaving religion. Especially, he has a special interest in homosexuality and religion, and a lot of his story, as you'll hear, revolves around working with young people who because of their religious upbringing, are in the midst of a major crisis around their identity. And John's podcast has been going for 10 years. They have over 600 episodes, and it's one of the most popular podcasts of its genre on iTunes. And I invite you and encourage you to go to Mormon Stories. Even if you're not a Mormon, I think, or a former Mormon, you will find so much on that podcast that it resonates with anyone who has gone through a crisis of faith and a transition in their religious ideology. I'll come back on the end of the show and give you a few more updates and announce a very special partnership that John and I are entering into. So for now, sit back, relax, and enjoy my conversation with John Dehlin. John Dehlin, welcome to the Life After God podcast.
Thanks, Ryan Bell. I'm a huge fan of your podcast, so it's an honor to be on your show.
And mutual admiration for yours. And we've it's a little overdue, I think. I've been wanting to have you on the show and, listening to your show a little bit here and there. And some friends of mine, it's fun. I'm sure you get this too. Listeners say, who you should interview, and they give you a list of people that you should talk to.
Yeah.
And you've been on several of those lists, and so I'm finally getting here. So I'm really, really happy that we can do this.
It's my pleasure. I'm excited.
So you are, for those that don't know, the founder and host of the podcast Mormon Stories, and you also have a website, Mormon Transitions, and you do faith crisis coaching, I think you call it, where you work with people who are going through a faith crisis. And you've been doing the podcast now for what, 10 years?
Yeah, 10 years. Yeah.
That's fantastic. Yeah, 620 some episodes, I think. It's really impressive. And I'm just a baby podcaster over here.
But you're making fast ground. Keep it up.
Yeah, thanks. It's so much fun. My first fear about it was that I would run out of people to talk to, and it would come. I release my shows on Wednesday, so I would have this fear that I would come Tuesday, and I would think, oh my goodness, who am I going to talk to? It's going to totally bomb, And so far, I'm backlogged into April, so
yeah,
so it's doing well. So
yeah.
I'm really excited about you being on the show, and I want to get into your story. And then eventually talk about what you're doing now, and kind of some things that we've been talking about offline. So, you were raised in the Mormon Church, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, that's true. My ancestors go back to the very beginnings of Mormonism in the 1830s and 40s. My ancestors, knew Joseph Smith. This is like 6 generations ago. They crossed the plains as pioneers, many of them. They settled in Utah and Idaho through my mother. The Bensons and the Parkinsons, they settled a good chunk of southern Idaho. I was just reading my history a little bit, my genealogy. I learned recently that my great-grandfather on my mother's side was a polygamist. He had 4 wives. And so my grandmother, Karma, my mother's mother, she was the daughter of the 3rd wife of William Brigham Parkinson. And
wow.
so literally I knew my grandmother. So, my grandmother was the daughter of a polygamous family. So, I'm about as Mormon to the bone as you could probably get.
And is 6 generations, is that, I'm from an Adventist background, and our origins go back to the 1840s as well. And when I meet an Adventist that's 5 or 6 generations Adventist, that's pretty much the beginning, isn't it? Are there more generations than that?
Yeah, if you're in your 40s, 6 generations is about as good as it gets. Yeah, of course, if you're in your 20s or you're a newborn now, you're going to be 8, 9 generations potentially. But
Right.
I'm definitely pioneer stock and true blue to the bone Mormon.
Wow, that's amazing. And was your growing up experience in the church, what was that like? You were obviously, like, as you said, raised in the church, long history of Mormon ancestors, and was it a positive experience overall being in that community? What was it like, I guess, to grow up Mormon?
Yeah, so for many years Mormons gathered in Utah and were very insular. But sort of starting in the 60s and 70s, there was what you might call a diaspora, where Mormons started getting really good jobs and getting really good educations and started spreading out over the globe. So my dad, even though he was from Salt Lake City and my mom from Idaho, they moved to California and then to Texas. So I was raised primarily in Texas. I moved there when I was like 2 years old. I lived 5 years in Dallas and 12 years in Houston. So I consider myself a Texan. But when I moved to Houston in 1976, 77, the church, there were just a few congregations Mormon congregations within the 30-mile radius. And so Mormons were definitely in the minority. Katy, Texas, which is where I grew up. It was very much a Baptist town. And I remember my Mormon upbringing very, very fondly. I remember having a sense of pride that we were different from the people around us. I took pride in, graduating from high school, never having tried alcohol or tried a cigarette, never having even masturbated, if I can use that word on your show.
You can use any words.
I didn't mess around with girls, no premarital sex. But also I just, I was a good, clean kid. I was, student body president, captain of the varsity basketball team. And I really do attribute so much of kind of that Donny Osmond, good, clean living to my Mormonism, as much as Mormons might be seen outside as a cult or, as weird or bigoted. I just have such tender, fond memories of learning the songs as a kid and service projects and studying the scriptures and being really dedicated to Jesus, and to God and to righteousness. And, we didn't see ourselves as weird. We just saw ourselves as people trying to love each other and to make the world a better place and to help humanity do good things. And so, yeah, my parents, probably one of the tragic things that was a crack in my faith was when my parents got divorced. And, but see, even though my family kind of went crazy for a while, it was the church that kind of stepped in and supported me. And I had, leaders as a child and as a young man who took care of me and encouraged me and made me believe in myself. And so, yeah, I think of it as like the all-American white bread, Donny Osmond Mormon experience as a young kid. It was fabulous.
We as Seventh-day Adventists often got mixed up with Mormons and Jehovah's Witnesses. I mean, people just sort of threw all of the sort of mid-19th century American-born religions in one basket. And,
right.
If you were wearing a white shirt and a black tie, you were, a Mormon missionary, or
right.
if you were knocking on doors or doing any of that stuff, it was, and so people were like, oh yeah, so you guys are the ones with the prophet Joseph Smith. And I was like, no, our prophet's Ellen White. But we have a very similar, and again, I still sometimes say we because I feel like this is still so much a part of my my life and history.
Totally.
The Adventist Church started in New England around the same time in the early 19th century. There was a founding kind of moment, great disappointment when there was a prediction Jesus was going to come in 1844, and we had a prophet, as the Mormon Church does, and persecution and feeling like. I too, in high school, didn't drink, didn't smoke, didn't mess around with girls. Because we were Sabbatarians, I missed all the dances. I didn't go. My graduation was on a Friday night, and the Adventists observe Sabbath in the Jewish way from Friday night sundown to Saturday night sundown. And my high school actually moved graduation up an hour so that I could participate in the ceremony.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, I mean, this was my experience as well. Like,
yeah.
I was a vegetarian at a time when people just thought that was weird. And but I do have the same kind of feeling of fondness about Sabbath afternoon dinners at the house, and when the preacher would come over and we'd have these long conversations about how there could be dinosaurs before the flood, and then what happened to them, and how do we figure all this stuff out. And it was great. I loved it.
Yeah, we had, fortunately for us Mormons, we were allowed to dance, and we loved to dance. So some of my fondest memories are things like, dances where 300 kids would take over an entire church gymnasium and just stomping to Michael Jackson or Men Without Hats or Lover Boy. This was the mid 80s.
But you couldn't touch each other too much, right?
No, we could slow dance. No, we could slow dance. They would sometimes want to make sure they could put a book between us, but no, you could totally dance. We would have dance festivals where we'd all dance, or we'd put on musicals. They called them road shows. We would do service projects. The youth programs were dynamite. But another thing that was interesting is, because I was in a Baptist town. There'd be girls, let's just say, who I liked and they liked me. But as soon as mom and dad found out that their kid was dating a Mormon, they would sort of put an end to it. Right. And, the local First Baptist Church would hold a weekend seminar called Mormons and Other Cults. And it was really weird to feel like you were part of something so beautiful, to have such amazing experiences, but then to have the host culture view you as a cult, as something evil. And in some ways, I think that's the secret sauce to some of these more fundamentalist religions, because you actually, at least I did, you get this sort of excitement and confidence that you're other. And it instead of making you feel like you have low self-esteem, it makes you feel like you're part of the chosen. And so we called ourselves, children of God. We kind of considered other people Gentiles. We were kind of the pure blood of Israel, and that we actually got a real kick from it,
Yeah, we called ourselves the remnant, the little group that's on the right track.
Yeah, that's awesome.
In fact, my first girlfriend in high school was a Mormon girl, and so that was kind of confusing for our families, like they didn't really want her dating an Adventist, and my parents didn't really want me dating a Mormon. But I think they all had the wisdom to know that it wasn't like we were going to get married next week or something, that it was probably, sophomores in high school. It was going to be fine. And her sister was actually one of my best friends was in my grade. And the girl that I dated was a couple grades below me. And and their family was great. We would go over to their house. I would go over to their house on, nights of the week, during the weekends. And their family was just fantastic. And I loved it. I loved being with their family.
Yeah, I don't, it's funny because if you watch that South Park episode called All About the Mormons, they do make fun of Mormons there, but really the joke is how amazing the Mormon family is in that movie, how well they get along, how much fun they have together. And while that wasn't my particular experience, obviously because my parents got divorced, that's been my general experience, that a lot of Mormon families just really do families well. Now, I'm sure we don't have a monopoly on that, but I do think there's something really special about the way, Mormon families can be, and probably other families of sort of fundamentalist, tight-knit religions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So for 10 years, you've been doing Mormon Stories. How did that come about in your life? How did you decide to do that?
Well, so, going back a bit, there are a couple things that kind of put cracks in what I would call my testimony. That's what Mormons call their set of beliefs. The first is that, there's a Mormon teaching that only Mormon families sealed in a Mormon temple get to go to the highest degree of heaven and stay together and then become, exalted gods. That's sort of fundamental core Mormon theology. Mm-hmm. And there's two important parts to that. One is that all the other families in the world that aren't married in Mormon temples, they don't get to be together in heaven. And that serves as a real motivation to want to, to go to the temple and to get sealed in the temple as a Mormon. But also, that's really ironic when you're a kid and you believe really strongly in that, but then your family gets divorced, right? So all these Mormons are in a loving, humble way bragging about how their family's eternal and all these Gentiles' families aren't eternal. But you're sitting there in Sunday school kind of wondering, well, what about your family that just got divorced? Are you like all the Gentiles where you're not going to be with your family? And that, that was a little bit of crack for me because it made me sensitive to others who don't enjoy a certain privilege, because I felt like I was out on that one. And there really isn't anything more important in Mormonism than being exalted with your family and becoming gods. And so that was a crack. I make the joke that a second crack was that it turns out that I went to high school with Renee Zellweger. And we were really close friends all through high school, believe it or not. And
cool.
My junior year of high school, I got up the courage to take her to one of these Mormon dances. It was a New Year's dance, and I drove all the way to her house, and I picked her up, and we were all dressed up, and we drove like 45 minutes to this dance, kind of north of where we lived. And we got in the building, and the leaders took one look at her. She had a sleeveless dress on, and I didn't think a thing about it. It was really modest. She's really petite.
Right.
And they told her she had to go home and change.
Oh my word.
And we had driven 45 minutes just to get there. And of course, dummy me, I'm like, okay, Renee, let's go change. And she's like, let's go home and change and we'll come back. And she's like bawling. She's like, take me home, and it ruined that chance with her. Now we remained friends, but she had no interest ever again in anything Mormon. And I joked that the Mormons had the chance to have their own John Travolta or Tom Cruise, and they blew it, They blew it. But
have you ever had a chance to talk to her about that since she's become famous?
the last time I talked to her was my senior year in college. She called me. She lived in Texas. She went to University of Texas. She told me that she was going to become an actress. And I have to admit it that I just kind of laughed. I'm like, oh, come on, well, it's like, good for you. But there was a real skeptical part of me because you don't expect a girl you dated that you went to high school with to be on the cover of Cosmopolitan.
That's for sure.
Or to show up in a movie trailer. But I mean, all those actresses went to high school with somebody.
That's right.
Yeah, it happened. I kind of laughed and I said, good for you. And we said goodbye and we lost touch. And then sure enough, I'm living in Chicago, married with my wife. And I look at the Jerry Maguire movie trailer and I'm like, that's Renee. But
wow,
no, we've lost touch.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, maybe she'll be on Mormon Stories one day.
Maybe, yeah, she'll tell the story.
Tell that story. That's amazing.
But just to continue, so the next big crack in my testimony happened on my mission. I was called to serve a mission in Guatemala. We served 2-year missions there. And strangely enough, I had a mission president, kind of the leader of my mission. He's a cousin of Mitt Romney. His name is Gordon Romney. And he was a executive, like a IBM executive kind of guy. And he was super ambitious and he wanted to be the top baptizing mission in the world. And so he would just encourage really aggressive missionary tactics. And so there came this missionary companionship that started doing this crazy thing where they would go to the poorest town they could in a little pueblo. They would play soccer with a bunch of little poor, Guatemalan kids without shoes. And after they were done playing soccer, they'd take 8 or 10 of them back to the chapel at a time to, quote, cool off.
Oh, yeah.
And what they would do is they never taught them discussions, lessons, never talked to their parents, never brought them to church. And they would baptize them 8 or 10 at a time. And so some of these companionships would get 40 baptisms in a single month.
Wow.
And they were all these little kids. And when I caught wind of that, I was such an idealistic, young missionary, who had never even masturbated. And I'm seeing like what appears to be like the perversion of God's holy ordinance, which is baptism, right?
Right.
So I go to my mission president, President Romney, and I say, hey, this stuff doesn't seem right. And this feels really bad. But what I didn't understand is we were the second highest baptizing mission in the world. And President Romney really liked the numbers, so he didn't want to know the details, right?
Oh, yeah.
And so instead of like putting an end to it and stopping it, he yelled at me and punished me and threatened me that if I kept talking and if I kept going against priesthood leadership, that I'd be in trouble. And you're taught exact obedience as a Mormon missionary. And so I came home from my mission with this really dark pit inside, just seeing the dark underbelly of what could be the corporate church. And strangely enough, I took my concerns after my mission to the church headquarters, to thinking that they would, completely go crazy and punish this guy. And basically what they did is they said, hey, you know what? He's almost done with his term as a mission president. So we're just going to go ahead and let him finish because it would be really ugly to make a big stink. And so they did nothing.
Oh, wow.
And so that was like, I did lose my faith then, but at that point I kind of said, the fish is starting to smell from the head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you're so ingrained in the culture and in your family ties and in your identity that it wasn't, I graduated from BYU. I married my wife. We had 4 kids. It wasn't until I was at Microsoft in Seattle, kind of around 2000, 2001, when I was called as a seminary teacher to teach religion to early morning high school students, when I started studying our church's history in depth.
Okay.
I thought I knew Mormon history, but once I started really digging into it, I learned that Joseph Smith had 34 wives. Never in 31 years as a devout Mormon had anyone ever mentioned any other wife to me at church than Emma, his first wife. And so you're thinking, whoa, okay, wait. So I've been here 31 years. I graduated from the church's university. I did 4 years of high school seminary where I studied every morning for an hour. the scriptures and our history, and never once did anyone happen to mention that our founding prophet not only married 34 other women, but several of them were 14, 15 years old.
Right.
Several of them were married to other men. And not only that, but he lied about it. When he was confronted publicly as a polygamist, he denied it. And we have that in writing. And then when people started coming out who were on the inside admitting that he had been a polygamist and that he was lying about it, as mayor and chief justice and, head of the legion of, his hometown, which was Nauvoo at the time, he actually ordered the printing press destroyed, and would punish anyone who spoke honestly about what he was doing. And, this is just like two things of like 300 major problems with Mormon history and doctrine and theology and but it gives you a sense of the sort of things I started learning, as a 30-something Mormon with 4 children, having fully given my life to the church. And that's when the wheels came off the wagon.
Yeah, boy, I can imagine. I mean, I remember, this is all an interesting feature of religions and Christianity in particular, the way that you can see the crazy in someone else's religion, but you can't
Right.
see it in your own.
Yeah.
Because I remember, learning a little bit about Mormonism just sort of from randomly. Like I never sat down to learn about Mormonism, but as a pastor, I had to know what other religions believed and other denominations. And people would, as I said, mix us up with Mormons. So I kind of had to say, no, these are the differences, and this is why we're definitely not Mormons, And they think they're going to become gods and have their own planet. And then there was this idea of, the golden plates, in Joseph Smith's, on his property or whatever. I mean, did that sort of thing just ever strike you as completely incredulous? Like, or did that just get absorbed, or did you not even hear about that as growing up in the church?
Oh no, we were proud of the golden plates. It's just like, honestly, it's this worldview where even though, I once did the math as a high schooler, I divided like 10 million Mormons into like 5 billion humans. And it's like less than 1/2 of 1%. And yet I'm like, oh, every other narrative, every other church is illegitimate. There's no other legitimate baptism or marriage or, sacrament. We're the one true church. We're God's chosen people on the earth. And Joseph is God's chosen prophet. And he's the one who spoke with God. And an angel delivered him golden plates. And I was proud of that. I was like, all the other church, all the other people don't understand the Bible. They don't have the authority.
Same for us.
They're corrupt, and we're the pure God's chosen people. And it just, and here's how it fit. The community made you feel so good. And the teachings that you were better than everybody else and true and God's chosen person made you feel so dang good. Why would you ever want to look under the covers?
Right.
You know?
That's true. And there was like, for Adventists, there was probably for you guys too, there was this double narrative. One was that we have the truth, and in the end of time, people will truly see the truth, and those that will accept it will be saved. So there was this kind of triumphalistic narrative. But then there was also a corresponding minimalist narrative, which is, the truth is hard to accept, and we're a small, tiny remnant, and in the end of time, when Jesus comes back, there'll only be 144,000. So you could win either way. If people pointed out that the church was growing, they would say, oh, look, because the truth is having its day, And then if the church wasn't growing and declining, then you could say, well, the truth is hard to accept, and we are the remnant after all, and you can't really expect the world to accept this hard message. So you could have it both ways.
Yeah. Actually, the Mormon Church got itself into trouble because of the missionary tactics that I experienced on my mission. We had this massive statistical growth in the 80s and 90s where, like, Rodney Stark, some famous sociologist, was predicting that we would become like the next great world religion. And it was because the growth rates of the 80s and 90s were based on these fraudulent missionary tactics. And so I grew up with this interpretation of the prophecy in Daniel about the stone being cut forth out of the mountain without hands and consuming all nations.
Yeah.
We were taught that Mormonism was going to grow and sort of sweep the whole earth to usher in the millennium.
No. That was Adventist. We had that story.
No. But we thought we were growing, and we started telling people for decades we're the fastest growing religion,
Right.
and we were on paper. But now we're seeing that growth was fraudulent, and we're seeing that if you go to Brazil or Chile, we may claim 1 million members there, but on the census, maybe only 100,000 people will actually claim that they're actually Mormons, and it's because they got baptized once, but they don't even remember it.
Right.
So now that's what's funny. Now the church leaders are starting to tell people, oh, the times are getting really scary, and we're starting to be persecuted, and don't expect, we're going to fall out of favor because the world's so evil, and because we supported same-sex marriage, and people are going to hate us now, and so we're not going to grow. But that's an opposite narrative to what I grew up with. But people are okay. They forget, and they just kind of move on with whatever the current teaching is.
Yeah, the current explanation for why things are the way they are.
Totally. Yeah.
So you started doing Mormon Stories while you were still a Mormon. Were you active in a local congregation at the time you started the podcast?
Yeah. So I was totally devastated after losing my faith. But just, fortunately or unfortunately, there was a strain of Mormon scholars from the 70s and 80s that were trying to do something comparable to what the Reformed Jews did back in the 50s and 60s, which was to say, you don't have to believe everything literally. You don't have to obey everything you're told. And they were trying to advance sort of a progressive form of Mormonism that would allow you to retain your culture, just like Reformed Jews, but not have to hold on to bigoted or, literalistic beliefs. And so instead of just bailing, which sometimes I wish I had done, I had this really idealistic sense that maybe we could carve out a space within Mormonism for progressive thought. But to do that, we had to start speaking openly and not cowering to the threats of excommunication, because very famously, Mormon scholars started really picking up steam in the 70s, 80s, and early 90s. And so what the church did to combat that in 1993 is they picked 6 of the most prominent Mormon scholars in September of 1993, and they excommunicated 6 people in 1 month.
Oh, wow.
And they call this the September 6, and within Mormon intellectual circles, it was a really bad thing. And so for literally 20 years, it really sent a chill. Would that be? No, I'd say 10 years. It sent a real chill in Mormon scholarly academic discourse.
Yeah, I bet people were not as willing to sort of speak out.
But when I had my faith crisis around 2001, 2002, 2003, I just thought it was outrageous that there was nothing on the internet. There was no one talking about this in any public way, and everybody was scared. And so I took this leap of faith, and I was making a couple $100,000 a year at Microsoft. I was working with some of the top people there, and we just left and we moved to this tiny town in Logan, Utah. I went from whatever, a couple $100,000 a year to like $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, got into a Ph.D. program and started a podcast in 2005. And the idea was, whatever happens to me or to anyone, we have to start talking openly about this stuff. Like that. Yeah. I don't care if I'm excommunicated, if this ends bad. What I will not do is just allow silence and coercion to persist. And so what I try to do very carefully is never to attack the church leadership, because that's lethal.
Right.
And never to deny the church's truth claims personally, because that's lethal. But what I would do is I would bring on, Mormon historians, gay Mormons, black Mormons, feminist Mormons, polygamous Mormons. I would bring on whatever type of Mormon I needed to address a difficult issue. And I would just have them tell their story, because I thought it's one thing if we're like trying to be Rush Limbaugh or Sean Hannity or Glenn Beck and like yell at the church and call them to repentance and become kind of a pundit. And I said, I don't think that's going to emotionally work. If you read Jonathan Haidt's work, it's a rider on an elephant, and the elephant is emotion.
Right.
And we're not going to move people through logic. You can't reason someone out of a position they arrived at emotionally. And so stories would become this Trojan horse where I didn't have to say what I did or didn't believe. We didn't have to criticize anybody. We would just bring a gay man on who served a mission in the church and was told by his bishop to marry a woman. So he married the woman, and then he had kids, but then the gayness didn't go away like his bishop promised. And then he suffered for 20 years, and he went through reparative therapy, and he tried to make it go away, but he couldn't. And ultimately he divorced his wife because he was miserable and his wife was miserable. And then he found the man of his dreams and he got married, and now he's super happy and healthy. And if you just let that guy, which Buckley Jepson was one of my first interviews, you let that guy tell his story, well, that's harder to argue with. And it really touches people because you can argue about the biology of homosexuality. But when you've got this guy saying, don't tell me I didn't try to change my sexual orientation. I tried for 20 years to the point where I was ready to cut my wrists. And when he's crying as he says that, well, you start paying attention and it moves you emotionally. And so again,
a few years ago, my friends made a film called Seventh Gay Adventist.
Oh wow!
And they took the same approach, and they didn't make it a polemical film. They just made it a story. And these are all people who wanted to stay in the Adventist church, who wanted to be accepted in their congregation, and some of them ended up not going to church anywhere. One of them found a welcoming Adventist church, and the others became like non-denominational something. But you're right. These stories get underneath the armor that we put up, and people are hear them, because a lot of times I feel like the narrative is, well, these are angry, rebellious people that they're shaking their fist at God. And I've heard sermons saying that the homosexual agenda is a bunch of angry people that are deliberately rebelling against God, doing what they know isn't right. And then you hear a story like that with weeping and agony, and how can you argue with that?
Yeah. Yep. And that was our secret strategy. And we interviewed apostates, we interviewed polygamists, we interviewed feminists, we interviewed black, people of color. And the whole purpose was to spread information in a non-defensive way that would change hearts and minds. And yeah, so we did about 10 years without facing the full wrath of the church.
And it changed your heart and mind as it went along too, I imagine. Like you are also on a journey as you're doing all this, journalism essentially. Yeah,
it was a real roller coaster ride, because I started out really idealistic. And honestly, when I started out, my literal goal was to keep people in Mormonism, because I saw all these people leaving and it really bothered me. I considered myself a real loyalist to my tribe, so to speak. And I'm just like, we're one big happy family. We can't just disappear and leave. And of course, with my Mormon values, I'm like, oh my gosh, when people leave Mormonism, they start drinking. Sometimes they start having sex with other people. Sometimes they smoke weed or they get divorced, and we can't have that. And so I'm trying to keep people from going out to the big bad world and becoming evil, which of course I have a bit of a different perspective now, but that was my motive when I started. And so I felt like I was helping some people stay in the church, but no matter what, I found out that just talking openly about these issues and just informing people about our history inevitably led a good chunk of these people out. And that was so traumatic to me. I felt like I was screwing with people's lives, where I shut down Mormon Stories for a while just out of guilt, knowing that some people left and they attributed their leaving to listening to my podcast.
And you're like, that's not what I wanted to have happen.
Yeah. But then, so I shut it down, but then people scream and go, John, we need you. There's no one else. Please don't leave. Don't leave us. And so I'd come back, and then I'd have adjusted expectations where it'd be like, okay, I can't keep people from leaving, but it's still good to talk openly about these things. And, I'll still try and keep those that I can, right? But then I would start learning things that I didn't know, and I would start becoming troubled about the things I was learning. And then it started getting really awful when I would have these people, literally, and Ryan, I don't know if you've had these types of experiences, but like a guy would say, John, I live in Brooklyn. I'm flying to Utah. I want to drive up to Logan just to have breakfast with you. Can you make time? And then I would make time. We'd have breakfast. he would pour his heart out to me about, he's secretly gay, or has a sexual addiction, or his wife's bulimic, but they can't tell anybody, or he's lost his faith, but if he tells his wife, she's going to leave him and take the kids, and all this incredible pain. It was like this big balloon, water balloon in the sky that had been collecting all this pain. And it's like Mormon Stories had punctured this big hole in the balloon, and all this pain started falling down upon me. And it didn't matter whether I was in China or Cambridge or, wherever. Mormons would want to meet with me, secretly tell me their stories. And it was just like incredible stories of pain and suffering. And
you became their confessor. You became the safe listening ear.
Totally, because they didn't feel safe telling anyone. They couldn't tell their parents. They couldn't tell their spouse. They couldn't tell their brother. They couldn't tell their bishop, because I
get emails like that all the time too, and phone calls. It's tragic.
Yeah, there's just this culture of silence and shame and fear. Now that's, obviously that's not what I felt growing up. I felt like it was an amazing culture of joy and clean living, but adults live under this, and sometimes adolescents live under this culture of guilt and shame and fear and silence. And so that started making me really angry, because when I meet with someone who's sobbing because the wife took the kids and divorced them, not because they, cheated on their spouse, but because they learned that Joseph had 34 wives, or that the Book of Abraham or Book of Mormon were fraudulent, and they just tried to talk about it. That's all. That was their only crime. It was an otherwise healthy marriage. And now, now a family's being split apart. Or I'll meet with this closeted gay adolescent who literally wants to kill himself, because he can't come out as gay. And I'm like, this is unacceptable. And so I started getting more angry and angry. And so over time, a lot of my listeners hear that while I started out trying to be objective and I started out trying to keep people in the church, sometimes I would get really angry and people would sense that I wasn't as objective. And so, a lot of listeners found that they were as interested in my own roller coaster ride as they were these interviews that I was doing.
Yeah. And then and all this time you stayed in the church officially as you were doing all of that, and your anger is building. But then about a year ago, all of that changed for you, and the attention really started focusing on you, right?
Yeah. In 2013, okay. So let's go back a little bit. 2008, the church started really, with its Proposition 8 stuff. I had become I had become an LGBT ally before that. My entire dissertation for my Ph.D. was on the LGBT Mormon experience. I learned all about attempts to change sexual orientation and reparative therapy and suicide and just mixed orientation marriages and all of that awful stuff that, fundamentally religious people have to deal with. And so when the church came out with its Proposition 8 stance, I felt like I was going to war with the church over homosexuality. And I did that for several years while still keeping safe. But once Mitt Romney started running for president, the church curiously backed off a lot of those stances. And so you'll see after Proposition 8, for almost 8 full years, the church kind of stops making a big deal about same-sex marriage. They kind of stopped making noise. They kind of stopped fighting legislative battles. They took it away in Hawaii. They tried to fight it in California. But then by 2012, they left New York alone. When New York passed, legalized same-sex marriage, they left Washington State alone. And so you almost got the sense by 2012 that the church had learned its lesson from the backlash of Proposition 8. But once Mitt Romney lost that second time, it was as if the gloves came off again. And by 2013, the church started really amping up its rhetoric against same-sex marriage. And simultaneous to that, there was this woman named Kate Kelly who started fighting within Mormonism for female ordination. And
I remember that.
Yeah. And they started clamping down on her. And so by fall of 2013, I was like, I can't play this sort of diplomatic, neutral journalistic role anymore. And so I was invited to give a TED Talk in fall of 2013. I gave a TED talk on being an LGBT ally as a Mormon. I came out publicly in support of female ordination. And by January of 2014, my bishop had called me in and told me that he was going to launch yet another investigation on me. This will have been the third investigation that my church launched on me in a 10-year period. And my family and I were sick of investigations. And yeah, so by August of that year, I was told that the church was going to, well, actually it was June or July, I was going to be summoned to what's called a disciplinary council, where you sit in front of 15 men and they judge your worthiness before God. And because I took that threat to the New York Times, and Lori Goodstein published, the article about that threat, that Kate Kelly and I were being threatened with excommunication, it took my bishop another 6 months or so to actually pull the trigger. But by February of 2015, I was excommunicated from the Mormon Church.
And do they have to justify that decision empirically, or do the 15 of those guys just meet and they were like, okay, we vote thumbs down?
No, it was a laughing stock. It was a kangaroo court. It was a star chamber. It was the decision had been made before I ever got in the room.
Right.
It was based on pressure that my bishop and stake president were getting from leaders above them. We have that pretty well documented, and I wasn't allowed to. They bring me into this big chamber with my wife, and they tell me, we'll give you we're going to read the charges against you. You're supposed to be able to see who the people are that are accusing you of things. They didn't let me see any of my accusers. I just had the charges read against me. They gave me an hour to plead my case. They told me, you're not allowed to ask us questions. It's you that's on trial, not us. They didn't ask me any questions other than whether I pled, innocent or guilty to the charge of apostasy. I had 5 witnesses come in to testify on my behalf. I gave a little speech. They dismissed me. They deliberated for a few hours with a huge crowd of like 300 people with the candlelight vigil outside the church building and the international news media. And they ended up just making that deliberation, but they don't have to justify anything. It's a complete mockery of justice,
And then I read in I think it was a Religion News Service piece that you then appealed the decision to try to stick it out a little bit longer.
Well, it's funny. Everything has so much nuance. I did not appeal the decision because I wanted them to reverse it. Right. I would have been okay if they reversed it, but that wasn't my motive. What the Mormon Church does is it wants to have it two ways. It wants to, you get this with the Mountain Meadows massacres. So in the late 1800s, a group of like 150 Mormons, I don't know how many Mormons, let's just say 20 or 30 Mormons, slaughtered like 150 men, women, and children. And it was a real problem because, the government wasn't liking Mormons to begin with. So the leaders of the church ended up blaming it on the local people. And since that time, the church has always wanted to have it both ways. We're a very patriarchal, corporate, hierarchical organization. But as much as possible, the church wants to be able to blame all decisions at the local level. Right. And so,
same with Adventists.
Yeah. And so for me, I wanted to make sure with my appeal that the very top, the first presidency, the prophet, the first and second counselor, and the quorum of the 12, that they would be held responsible for this decision. So, when you appeal, you do appeal to the prophet and the first presidency. And that means that they couldn't blame it as a local decision and that they would be held responsible for what they did. And in fact, they did deny my appeal. And, so I am no longer a member of the church. So
you're now a foreman.
I'm a foreman. That's right. That's right.
Wow. And, it's interesting. I think, in the comment section of that article, and there were only a couple, mercifully, there were only a couple of comments, but I saw people attacking you in a very similar way that I've seen them attack me and others, that this was all for you, a big narcissistic media stunt to draw attention to yourself so that you could make a bunch of money, which, of course, in your case, you had a job where you could make a good deal of money and you left that to do this, but nobody, of course, remembers that. But they always just, it seems like the impulse, and I don't know if it's just religious people, or in your case, was it just Mormons or other Christians too, saying, this guy's just, trying to make 15 minutes of fame out of this for himself. Yeah,
I had a friend once tell me that a cult is any religious organization that won't let you leave with your dignity intact. And
wow.
And that's, so what happened is this whole host of Mormon apologists spring up, and they make all these incredibly awful claims that I'm a liar, that I'm a deceiver, that I'm selfish, that I'm a media whore. And, it's just so crazy because, as you said, by the time I was 7 years into Microsoft, I had stock options. I had met Bill Gates several times. I had been made offers or given opportunities to work with some of the top people in the company. Even after I left Microsoft and came to Logan, I got hired by Massachusetts Institute of Technology. I was making six figures there, was the only employee west of the Mississippi for MIT. And I gave all that up to go back to graduate school to become a psychologist, to try and do research to help gay Mormons not commit suicide and to help people of faith. I went through 9 years of graduate school making, a pittance of what I could have made. Sure. I certainly gave up over $1 million in income. And I could just tell you, the media exposure is excruciating. It is not fun. Yes, I've been on Good Morning America. Yes, I've been on Nightline. But never was it enjoyable, and it was horrific for my family. I hated every minute of it. But how in the world, if you have a culture of silence where everybody's suffering in silence, the only solution is to speak openly.
That's right.
And so what they're going to do, they're going to call you a media whore because that's all they can do.
Right. Yeah. And reformers, as far back as the Protestant Reformation and before, have always been, character assassinated, and then in some cases literally assassinated, to stop them from speaking out, because this type of mind control and religious abuse thrives in a culture, as you say, in a culture of silence. And, it's hard to maintain this balance. Like, you wrote a piece this morning on your blog saying, that it's hard and you sometimes fail at this, but that you really want to always have in mind treating religious people with respect, even though you disagree with them about many things. And it's tough, isn't it? Because you love the people, and you can also see the way it's hurting them. Certain kinds of beliefs or certain ways of believing are so damaging to people, and you want to speak up and not be silent. But at the same time, to do that feels like a personal attack to people. I mean, do you have a hard time separating, these concepts for people? Like, how do you explain that?
Yeah, it's super hard because let's just take a really simple example. Let's just say I went to a car salesman and he sold me a bad car, right? Well, I would want to tell everyone in my family, all my neighbors, don't go to that dude because he's a fraud. He's a charlatan, right? Yeah. And when you commit to a church like Mormonism, like the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, you don't just, it's not like a $15,000 car purchase. You're paying 10% of your income for the rest of your life. You're deciding, you're letting them, severely influence who you marry, when you get married, a 2-year mission service. I had a college roommate die on his mission. He was hit by a car. Well, whoa. That's awesome if the church is true and he's a martyr and a hero. But if the church isn't true, then my friend Monty died in vain, right? The stakes can be high. But even then, you serve the 2-year mission, you get married early, you have all these kids, you may have made other choices for education, you may have made other choices for who you married, when you married, what your career was. And I see all these people 30, 40, 50, 10, 20, 30 years into their Mormon experience. Then they discover that the church isn't true. And you can't believe how bitter, angry, sad, disillusioned they are to say, I gave 10, 20, 30 years of my life to this cult. And so, and not to mention, you see, 5% of all Mormon kids are gay or lesbian. And the church has like waged war on gays and lesbians, named them immediate apostates if they same-sex marry. And so you see your brother or your sister, you know, raising their children where by mathematically alone, one or two of them is going to be gay.
Right.
And you're thinking, this could end very, very badly where, you know, this isn't fiction where a parent walks into a garage and finds their gay Mormon kid hanging from the rafters. Right. This is not fiction. This is real. And so on the one hand, you just want to like, just like when you were a Christian, you wanted to spread the good word and be a missionary. You still have that missionary impulse and you want to turn to these people, your family, your friends and say, get out, out, you know,
it's on fire. Get out,
save yourself now, get your life back and enjoy whatever years you may have left. So that's kind of on the one hand, but on the other hand, and somebody said this in the comments of my blog post, you know, you don't want to spend so much time fighting monsters that you become a monster yourself.
That's
you know?
right. Yeah, you can focus so much on what you aren't that you become a little bit of what you don't want to be or what you're against.
Totally. You become the thing that you fought. And Robespierre, right? It's
right.
So it's a real tricky balance. And I have to remind myself all the time because when the LDS Church, you know, in November of 2015, they came out with this policy that it's crazy. It's crazy. They didn't come out with a policy that said if you're gay, you're an apostate. And they didn't come out with a policy that said if you're, if you have illicit sex with 50 people and you're gay, you're an apostate. Do you know what makes you an apostate now in Mormonism if you're gay?
What is it?
If you marry someone and commit to them a life of fidelity and love, that is the only thing that makes you an immediate apostate. And then not only that, but then any children of those same-sex parents, it's not just that, you know, the parents aren't welcome. A child isn't even allowed to become a member. A child isn't even allowed to have a baby blessing or a baptism. And you know, where did Jesus say, turn away the little children because their parents are gay? I thought Jesus said something like, suffer the little children to come unto me because of and whoever would, you know, turn one of these kids away from me, is it better that a millstone be hung around their neck? Something crazy like that. Right. So, you know, when the church is like waging war, I get angry. And I remember making this post the other day that's just like, all you progressive Mormons who stay in Mormonism, if you pay your money to this church, you're complicit in the, 30 plus suicides that have happened just since November.
Wow.
But that just makes everybody, you know, angry at you and it turns them off and it makes them dismiss you. And it's just so incredibly unproductive. So it's so hard to do what we're doing.
Yeah, it sure is. I mean, and that brings me to something exciting and positive, which is, you know, first of all, as we've talked offline and then again today, there's so many similarities between Mormonism and Seventh-day Adventism. Your story is and mine. I mean, I think my story made a big media impact, but yours even more so because of because of the intense media focus around the excommunication of, and I'm forgetting her name, Kate Kelly, and then you, and it's more well known. I think, you know, Mormonism is more well known than Adventism, but our stories have these similar timelines. I mean, you're roughly my same age, and we're both doing similar work now. And so I just think it would be we've been talking about kind of partnering up in a way, like you'll still obviously have your work and I'll have mine, but we want to begin to establish a partnership where we begin to work together. And I've been sort of hinting at this on Facebook with folks, and I'm just really excited to announce that we're gonna really explore that and see where it leads, because I feel like your work with Mormon Stories, Mormon Transitions, the counseling that you're doing with people in faith crisis is so similar to what I'm trying to do. I don't have a Ph.D. in psychology, unfortunately. I wish I could plug into the Matrix and just download that real quick, but I'm sure you wish you could have done that too instead of taking 9 years to do it. But we're doing such similar things, and I want to talk to you just in the minutes we have remaining about what's your hope for post-theistic life? I mean, I guess, and I didn't get a chance to ask you if you consider yourself an atheist now, but what do you see for the future? Because I think we need to, as I said before we began this interview, we obviously, you and I agree that we need to not just help people turn away from something bad, but begin to build something towards which people can turn when they leave the abusive religious life of their past.
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that question, Ryan. And this is why I'm so honored to be on your podcast. So, I remember when, Hitchens and Dawkins and Harris and Shermer, all came out with their books. I've met Sam Harris, I've met Michael Shermer. I have deep respect for these guys. I don't feel like I sit in any negative judgment over them. But as I've gotten to kind of get a feel for, the atheist community, the secular community, the humanist community, I have deep respect for what they're doing. I love what they're doing. I love the minds. I love the thought. But while they're doing important work in many ways to kind of ask people, forcing people to ask questions, to challenge belief, to shine a big light on belief, I think that takes us part of the way. But I think that we've got some really important work to do, because really, I know the believer mindset, and to the believer mindset, well, those guys are just evil. And a bunch of evil people yelling at you, what does that make you do? Or insulting you? That doesn't make you want to let go of what, brings you comfort and what you believe in. That makes you want to cling more tightly to what you believe in. And it becomes this fulfillment of a prophecy, like, oh, well, the scriptures say that the righteous will be persecuted in the last days. Oh, and here these guys are persecuting us. This is a fulfillment of prophecy. And that even makes me more excited to be a Mormon now. And I just... I've seen enough in the ex-Mormon and post-Mormon communities. Again, beautiful people, amazing things. But, being, processing your anger about your religion, and exposing your religion and criticizing your religion, that's only, let's just say, a quarter or a half of the battle. And so I was so thrilled, so I heard about Sunday Assembly, right? And I'm like, whoa, okay, no, before that, back up. I listened to Alain de Botton's, Atheism 2.0 TED Talk. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this guy's brilliant. Why do we have to just sit and yell at religion all day? Why don't we steal the best plays from their playbook and start building amazing communities that have TED Talks for sermons and music that's secular and community, where we can still deliver casseroles to sick people and service projects and, have funerals and marriages and weddings and baby blessings, but just do it, do it with secular people. And so, Alain de Botton got me very excited. Then I learned about Sunday Assembly, and while, I am so excited about what they're doing, I think we need lots of models. And I wasn't convinced that the Sunday Assembly model would work well for Mormons, just because we're pretty skeptical, and it's just a different, sensibility or culture than I think is going to fly with Mormons. So that's when I learned about Oasis and what Mike Aus and Helen Stringer are doing. I think that's amazing. Right. Then I found out about your podcast. I should add that I actually went to a Sunday Assembly, conference, and I met Hemant Mehta and Bart Campolo, and I fell in love with Bart, who you had on your podcast. Yeah. And I love what he's doing with secular humanism. And then I found your podcast, and you interviewed the Greta Vosper, is that her name? Yeah, the Canadian minister in Toronto. She was amazing, and you interviewed I'm sorry I don't have the names, but a Muslim woman recently, secular Islam or progressive Islam, and it what it feels to me is like we're at this really important moment of time where this generation of 30-somethings and 40-somethings are saying, we can do better than just to rage at the machine. And raging's important. As a psychologist, anger motivates you and helps you process. But if we really want to make a difference, we have to build something. And it doesn't have to be a secular community, although I think that's an important piece, which is why I've started a little Oasis community here in Utah. There's actually 5 now that are kind of starting to spring up. But I want to see something like superheroes. I grew up watching the Super Friends, and it was like Superman and Batman and Robin and Wonder Woman and Flash. And it doesn't matter whether you like the Super Friends or the Avengers or the X-Men, the metaphor still applies. I want to see you and Bart and Greta and Helen and Mike and me and 5 or 10 other people. We need an ex-Scientologist, an Jehovah's Witness. We need ex-Orthodox, another one. You need to get Shulam Dean on your podcast.
Yes, he's on my list for sure.
He's freaking amazing. And
he's incredible.
And if we can pull together and show that this isn't just a Mormon thing or a Seventh-day Adventist thing, this religious transition thing is universal, and it's here to stay. The rise of the nuns, 30% of the millennials now are no longer affiliating with any tradition. Within 10 or 20 years, America is going to become Western Europe, and Mike Au said this recently, nature abhors a vacuum, and it's not like belief is going to go away, and it's not like community is going to go away. We're going to have this big vacuum where religious beliefs evaporate and religious communities evaporate. And it's either going to be like video games, and I'll just say video games and pornography. I'm invoking my old Mormon self here. It's going to be, meaninglessness or sin or, just unhealthy ideas or lifestyles, or we're going to fill that vacuum with healthy communities, healthy ideologies, healthy values, and healthy beliefs. Mm-hmm. And I want to help build the latter. And for me, if you think about those conservative religious people clutching to their religion, what's going to make them let go? It's not when they're shamed. It's when they have something better to reach for and hold on to. And Ryan Bell, I want to create that with you and with Greta and with Helen and with, Bart and Mike and everyone else who wants to join. And maybe this is like, annual conferences for religious transitions. Maybe it's a network of therapists. Maybe it's, secular communities. But I think we've got to build something, Ryan.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why I'm so excited that you're going to join the board of advisors for Life After God, and with Greta, who's already a part of that. And I just think, it's not going to happen overnight. We're not going to snap our fingers and there'll be suddenly, an analog to the type of community that churches have traditionally provided. But I don't think that would be healthy anyway, because we really do need to do, I think, the hard work of building things from the ground up. If we just say, okay, let's do church, but we'll sub out the Bible sermon for a secular sermon, that's a good start. But I think there's a really deep issues and needs that need to be addressed. And the more I talk to former religious people, the more I realize, and the more I look at myself, let me just start with myself, the more I realize how deep I've imbibed some of the lies and the way that those have affected me, that have, make it very difficult for me to think of myself as a worthy person, someone who should be happy, who's entitled to happiness. I talk about this publicly. I see a therapist once a week, and we talk about this, that I don't often think of myself as entitled to being happy, or to put it the other way around, which is probably truer, I don't feel entitled to happiness because my religion taught me that I was here on this planet and as a human being to sacrifice and to give away the blessings that have been given to me so that others could be blessed and so that we could all eventually finally have happiness one day in paradise. And so for years, I've learned to forego my own happiness. And I'm just now at the age of 44 learning what it means to be happy and to crave happiness without feeling selfish about it. And I still struggle with that feeling like I'm being selfish. I shouldn't be focused on my own happiness. And then the other side of me says, what are you talking about? Happiness is what everyone should have, right? So these issues are deep inside of people, and it's going to take time for us to sort of, I guess, get the roots pulled out in some sense.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Well, congrats for doing your work. I mean, I've had to do a lot of work too, and it is really psychologically difficult to extricate yourself from a fundamentalist religion. But good for you for doing that hard work. And you're right. It's not like we're going to be able to just switch out the sermon for a TED Talk and Rock of Ages for Imagine by John Lennon and we're going to be off to the races. This is going to take decades. It's going to take creativity. It's, we're going to use the internet, and we're going to have to find the right way to deliver the right services to the right people at the right time. And who knows what it's going to look like. But I just think, man, this vacuum is opening up, and I would love to team with creative, thoughtful people like you and Bart and Helen and Mike and Greta and others to think about how we can fill that void in very constructive and healthy ways.
No, I completely agree. It's an exciting time, really, to be in this place. And I suppose, it's always an exciting time to be wherever you are, because something, good is always afoot if you're watching out for it. And I just love that, our paths have crossed like this, and that we have these opportunities to collaborate together. And I'm thrilled that Life After God is growing in this really healthy, seems to me is a healthy way, and just being humble about what the answers are and recognizing that we don't know exactly what's going to be the thing of the future, but just kind of step by step walking into it and saying, okay, what's next? What can we learn from one another? What can we try as an experiment? And then say, okay, this worked, this didn't work. What do people really need? Let's go deeper. All that is just thrilling to me. And I'm just great. It's just so grateful that you're going to be a part of all of this as well.
Well, thanks, Ryan. And I just wanted to let you know that I'm just really excited to be part of the Life After God team and to team with you and others to do some great things.
Yeah, it's great. Well, we've run out of time for today, but there are more podcasts coming. We'll definitely have you back and keep talking.
And I'm going to have you on Mormon Stories.
Awesome. I can't wait.
Yeah. So
perfect.
Yeah. So thanks, Ryan.
Yeah, we'll just keep the dialogue going, but I appreciate you sharing today, and we'll talk with you next time.
Thanks, Ryan. Keep up the good work.
Okay, you too. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye.
Well, there you have it. My conversation with John Dehlin, host of Mormon Stories podcast. I do hope that you will go to iTunes or wherever you get your podcast, or just go to mormonstories.org and listen to John's podcast. It's an incredible labor of love that he's been working at for 10 years to tell the stories of men and women and young people who have been caught in a web of deception and abuse, and have found their own unique ways to grapple with those challenges and find their way to freedom. And he's doing an incredible service to the Mormon community, and even if they don't recognize it, the official Mormon Church wants to put as much distance as they can between him and themselves, so as not to lose more members. But he's doing a great service to the people that he reaches through the podcast and through his counseling practice and the research and writing that he's doing. And I'm excited to hear about the Oasis expansion in Utah. That's going to be great. And we will talk more about that in the near future. But I want to take a minute here and just talk a little bit about what this relationship between Life After God and Mormon Stories means for us and for you. John is, as we mentioned, he has his Ph.D. in clinical and counseling psychology. And one of the big things that we are working on here at Life After God is creating a system by which we can work with individuals that are going through a process of deconversion and accompany them through that process in a way that brings added support and resources to individuals and even to families. And John has a huge head start on that work, and there's a great deal we can learn from him on that. And as we work to refine our coaching process, and we're working on possibly renaming that aspect of our work and really making it more robust and useful to you and to future participants in Life After God. John's going to be an incredible asset and resource and help to us in that process. John also reaches an enormous audience of Mormons and former Mormons and knows obviously the ins and outs of what that process and what that looks like to be coming out of the Mormon experience, which I have, even though Adventism is very similar in some aspects, I don't have any experience being a Mormon or really understanding the uniqueness of being a former Mormon. So I'm excited that John is with us in that regard. And then he also touched on this thing that he and I have been talking about for quite some time, which is the whole notion of religious transition. We have an entire generation and then a generation after that and one after that are moving into this vague sort of nebulous space that demographers for now are referring to as the nuns, people who, when asked about their religion, mark on the survey the box that says none. They're not necessarily atheists. They would not necessarily describe themselves even sometimes as agnostics. They might consider themselves spiritual but not religious, or they might consider themselves even Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or whatever they have been in the past, but are simply not affiliated with a formal religion. And there's an incredible need for people to find connections to others that are going through similar experience and to find community in supportive ways, things that the church has done well in the past, to create communities of moral discourse, to create opportunities for service and to mobilize people to create change in society in positive ways. And John and I both share a passion to see that work go on. We can criticize and critique religion, and that work is so important because people are stuck many times not knowing what to do next. But the most urgent need, in my view, and John, I believe, shares this view with me, that the urgent need is to create something new. As people turn away from religion, what are they turning towards? And in many cases, they're turning towards the everyday aspects of their life, their family, their work, their hobbies, travel, reading, discussions with friends, all the things that we all enjoy. But there is a need among most people, I believe, for an organized way of thinking about what's important to us and the kind of society that we want to create together. One of the great virtues of religion is the way that it brings a group of people together around the question of what kind of life do we want to live? What kind of society do we want to create? What kind of families do we want to raise? And this intentionality in living is something that religion has fostered. Now, whether the results of that intentionality have always been good, clearly not. But the idea of living on purpose, living intentionally, living with our eyes open and exploring deeply and reflectively on our lives is a kind of very generic religious impulse, and something that I think is fundamentally important for people. And I think that we that are in the humanist community still have a great deal to do to create a robust, supportive environment for people who are leaving various aspects of their religion, whether they're just leaving the organized religious aspect or whether they're leaving theism altogether and finding themselves sort of atheist and not sure what to do next. So with John on board and with Greta, who is already with us at Life After God, and others that I'm going to be inviting in the near future to build out this team of former religious leaders, I'm hopeful that the idea of religious transitions can be a much more central subject in the public discourse, and we can create opportunities for people to find their roots in a secular, humanistic, positive, uplifting worldview. And every time I talk to John, I just get inspired again. I get motivated again to think about the possibilities and to put them into action. So a huge welcome to John Dehlin to joining the Life After God leadership team as an advisor and consultant with us, and look forward to all the things that we'll work together on to create new opportunities for you and for those that have yet to discover the work that we're doing at Life After God. So thanks again for listening. As always, please share this episode with your friends, share it on social media. go to our website, lifeaftergod.org, subscribe to the podcast at iTunes or on Spreaker or both. And leave us a review. Actually, that would really help us if you go to iTunes and search for the podcast, Life After God, and then leave us a review. Rate us and review us. That really helps get the word out, make us more visible on the iTunes platform. And write to us if you have something to say, a thought, a reflection, something you appreciated about this episode, a critique, something we could be doing better. You can reach me at ryan@lifeaftergod.org. So thanks again for tuning in. We will be back next week with another exciting episode of the podcast. Until then, my name is Ryan Bell, and this has been the Life After God podcast.